All right, folks, last time we talked about some sampling methods. Purpose, remember, of sampling is to get a subgroup of the population that would share the same characteristics of the population without having to track down every single person, because that's often time consuming or impractical or takes a lot of money. So we covered simple random sample, cluster sample, systematic random sample, and stratified last time. Other ways, convenient sampling, just grabbing the first 10, first 100, or voluntary response with polls, asking people to respond to a survey, going up to them, or electronically asking for responses. What we're going to focus on today is exploring a little bit more into those like pros and cons of surveying in a certain way, and some of the drawbacks or things to look out for when we're sampling. So the first thing I'm going to have you do here is answer questions 1, 2, and 3, which is on the back side of that front page, based on what you think. Okay, it looks like it's a long part, but it's just 3 questions. It'll go pretty quick. And then we'll kind of talk about your thoughts and then put a little vocab to it. So pause the video now, take care of 1, 2, and 3, and then come back so we can chat. Hopefully for this first one, you came up with something about not everyone has a landline phone, not cell phone, just phone. Okay? A lot of times people have cell phones instead. So one, we're missing out on people who don't have landlines at all. But then phones in general, if it's the average age of people in the city, like babies are missing entirely. They wouldn't have a phone at all. Okay, so that's really important, is not everybody has that landline phone. And based on that, there's going to be an overestimate. One, landline specifically, older folks are the ones who are going to use it, but then you're also missing people who don't have phones, that younger population. This thing right here, or this, let's go back and we'll actually add the vocab now versus coming back to it. So this example is called undercoverage bias. Undercoverage. And that's a problem because if we don't hit the whole population's characteristics, then our sample is really not reliable and it's not going to give us the information. That's the whole point of taking a sample for our survey. The second example was they sent out 100 that was simple random sample, no problem. However, only 40 of them responded. So they're not getting all of their sample that they intended. And specifically, from those 40 that they did get back, it said 36 of them said they did all their homework last night. So a couple things could be happening. That only 40 responded. Maybe they responded because they are the ones who truly did their homework, and they didn't want to the other 60 didn't want to respond. So we could be missing some people there. Or the 36 who responded yes could have lied. They're like, this is my principle. I don't want to look bad and say that I didn't do my homework, even though I had a good reason. So a couple things here. And because of this one, we have bias that's related to non-response. Now this is very different than a voluntary sample because the 100 people were selected for the sample, then they didn't respond after they were selected. And we'll add some notes when we get to the notes page that kind of clarifies the difference between those two things. This was also an overestimate because the people like they could lie, or maybe the more responsible ones. So we're missing people who didn't do their homework, probably. The last one was the Boy Scout. Dressing in uniform is what's going to cause the problem because they may be more likely to say that they supported Boy Scouts if they've got a sweet, cute little Boy Scout coming up to their door saying, do you support me? So again, that could respond in an overestimate. This is one example, the interviewer's characteristic of response bias. There are a few that we are going to talk about when we get to some examples. So this is one example of response bias, is interview or characteristics. Okay, first thing, sampling frame. Sampling frame is actually, I know it sounds like the list of the people in the sample, but a sampling frame is actually the list of individuals in the population that you choose the sample from. So we talked about a simple random sample last time, and step one was number everybody in the population. So that was considered our sampling frame, that list that we got our random numbers from. Okay, this first one, let's think about it. It says occurs when some members of the population are less likely to be chosen or cannot be chosen. That was our under coverage. And that's going to lead to bias any time that the people we left out would answer differently than the rest of our group, if it's not characteristic of the rest of the population, like our landlines. Okay, the next one occurs when an individual chosen for the sample can't be contacted or refuses to participate. This was our non-response bias. Okay, again, if they would answer differently than the population would. Now, here's where I want to clarify the difference between that and the voluntary response. This after is what makes it different than voluntary response. That is a way to select the sample. So it's a sampling method, which can result in bias. But this one is the bias caused by non-response, which could occur for any sampling method if you're not asking the person directly in person. Maybe you're sending out an email, they don't respond. Okay, so non-response is you've chosen the sample, but the people that you chose to sample, you're not getting that response from. We can reduce non-response by providing some incentives. Okay, a lot of restaurants, if you go to the bottom of your receipt, you can scan a QR code to go do a survey, and if you do that, you're entered into like a drawing for maybe a discount or a coupon, okay, something like that. So incentives are commonly used. Another thing that this is really like money, but you could follow up in person. Okay, and that takes time, effort, and money a lot of times too when you're conducting research surveys to go track down the people to get their response. Okay, last one here occurs when there's a systematic pattern of inaccurate answers, questions, two-way survey questions, sorry, based on the characteristic of the interviewer. That was our Boy Scout question. Whether or not the survey was anonymous. Order of questions, so you could lead up in a certain way. Sometimes it's order of response as well. I know that all of us have done a survey that's 200 question long, and at the point where we're on question 200, we're just answering A sometimes, So if you order the answers, sometimes the top choice is more commonly picked. So this is our response bias. Because the way they're responding is different based on something about how the question was presented. Either who presented it, whether it was anonymous or not, order of questions, or wording of the question. And that's going to be biased anytime it's not what you considered a true response of the regular population. So here's one where we can talk about a slanted question or a confusing question. It says, this was an actual poll that happened, okay, in 1992. It says, does it seem possible or does it seem impossible to you that the Nazi extermination of the Jews never happened? From this question, 65% said it was impossible that it never happened. And it was only 65%. Why might this be? So, a lot of things that's happening here is possible, impossible, never happened. There's some confusion with the wording. Okay, so sometimes a double negative could be an issue. Confusing language. Okay, or just extra information. Added when it doesn't really need to be in here. Okay, these are some ways to slant a question one way versus the other. And in this case, it probably wasn't the intention of this survey, and sometimes people intentionally do this to sway their results to paint a picture that they want to paint. Okay, so what I'm going to have you do now is answer these last two questions. Try them, see if you can add vocab to what we've talked about, and then you'll come back to the video. We'll make sure you're on the right track and you'll be set to go. Alright, this one, we're going to talk about hopefully some things you come up with. So the first one, under coverage, because the students who are doing in-person learning are not actually included, and that was really vital to the survey because that's entirely what the survey was asking, the difference between the two. The second one was non-response because the sample was chosen 100, but only 28 of those actually responded. Okay, so we are missing those 72, and they probably are going to not look the same as those 28. A lot of times when people are responding, it's because they have strong opinions, one way or the other. And then the last one was a convenient sample. You may have called this under coverage because it could be that here the people responding for their learning preference are the people who are, you know, more confident or passionate about what their learning preference is for next year, and we may not see those other types represented in the, like how it would look in the actual population. Alright, this one, it said the wording was trying to add on this age of 75 years, but it already exists at 70. Without people knowing that, they may have assumed that 75 was the limit and there wasn't one before. So based on that, we are thinking that there's probably an overestimate here. It's greater than the true because people could still say yes if that extra context was included, but they were probably, or they may, I guess, I shouldn't assume, but they could prefer that that 70 stays and it not be, you know, extended out an extra 5 years. So, Sapling has your homework. If you have any questions, feel free to come by to ask.